Hello, Class 4. I'm Shaila Goel. I'm back with the chapter The Fifth Golden Ticket. My dear students, this chapter can be understood more with the help of the movies Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. These are the two movies based on this chapter. After reading this along with me, you can watch those movies. I hope you will enjoy. Charlie burst through the front door shouting, "Mother! Mother! Mother!" Mrs. Bucket was in the old grandparents' room, serving them their evening soup. "Mother!" yelled Charlie, rushing in on them like a hurricane. "Look, I have got it. The last golden ticket. It's mine. I bought 2 bags of chocolate, and the second one had the golden ticket. And there were crowds of people all around me wanting to see it, and I ran all the way home, and here I am. It's the fifth golden ticket, Mother, and I have found it." Here Charlie is coming to his mother and telling him about the fifth golden ticket to visit Willy Wonka's factory, that he has got it through the bar of chocolate that he has purchased. Mrs. Bucket simply stood and stared, while the four old grandparents dropped their spoons with a clatter and froze against their pillows. For about 10 seconds there was absolute silence in the room. Nobody dared to speak or move. It was a magic moment. Then, very softly, Grandpa Joe said, "You are pulling our legs, Charlie, aren't you? You are having a little joke." "I'm not!" cried Charlie, rushing to the bed and holding out the large and beautiful golden ticket for him to see. Dear students, although everyone was happy, but they couldn't believe that the news that Charlie has given him is true. They thought that he was joking with them. It couldn't be their luck. Actually, after Grandpa Joe was thrown out of the chocolate factory by Mr. Wonka, and after the bad luck of his father in his job, they couldn't believe that they are so lucky, or their grandchild is so lucky to get that fifth ticket. Grandpa Joe leaned forward and took a close look, his nose almost touching the ticket. The others watched him, waiting for the verdict. Then, very slowly, with a slow and marvelous grin spreading all over his face, Grandpa Joe lifted his head and looked straight at Charlie. The color was rushing to his cheeks, and his eyes were wide open, shining with joy, and in the center of each eye, right in the center, in that black pupil, a little spark of wild excitement was slowly dancing. Suddenly, with no warning whatsoever, he threw his arms and yelled, "Yippee!" And at the same time, his bowl of soup went flying into the face of Grandma Josephine. And in one fantastic leap, this old fellow of 96 and a half, who hadn't been out of the bed these last 20 years, jumped onto the floor and started doing a dance of victory in his pajamas. Students, as Grandpa was watching the ticket very carefully because he was not expecting this, and he wanted to make sure that whatever Charlie is saying is true. When he found out that the ticket was truly the fifth ticket, he was very, very happy, and there was a kind of a new energy in his old bones. Yippee! He shouted. Three cheers for Charlie. Hip hip hooray. At this point, the door opened and Mr. Bucket walked into the room. He was cold and tired, and he looked ill. All day long, he had been shoveling snow in the streets. What's going on in here? It didn't take them long to tell him what had happened. I don't believe it, he said. It's not possible. Show him the ticket, Charlie, shouted Grandpa Joe, who was still dancing around the floor in his striped pajamas. Show your father the fifth and the last golden ticket in the world. Grandpa Joe was very, very happy. His enthusiasm, his love have no bounds. He was dancing when Mr. Bucket came, but Mr. Bucket was very, very tired and he did not believe it. But Grandpa Joe asked Charlie to show his father the last ticket.
Here, read it aloud. Let's hear exactly what it says.
Let me see it, Charlie, Mr. Bucket said, collapsing into a chair and holding out his hand. It is very beautiful thing, this golden ticket, having been made, so it seemed, from sheet of pure gold, hammered out almost to the thinness of paper. On one side of it, printed by some clever method in jet black letters, was the invitation itself from Mr. Wonka. Read it aloud, said Grandpa Joe, climbing back into bed again at last. Mr. Bucket held the lovingly golden ticket up close to his eyes. His hands were trembling slightly, and he seemed to be overcome by the whole business. He took several deep breaths, then he cleared his throat and said, "All right, I will read it. Here we go." Now, students, Mr. Bucket, father of Charlie, was very tired. So he sat on the chair and he saw that golden ticket was really made up of thin sheet of real gold, and there was an invitation written with the black letters. Okay, he took deep breaths. His hands were shaking because he was overcome by the emotions. He really wanted Charlie to win that ticket, but he couldn't believe himself, right?
Read it aloud. Let's hear exactly what it says.
Greetings to you, the lucky finder of this golden ticket from Mr. Willy Wonka. I shake you warmly by the hand, for now I do invite you to come to my factory and be my guest for one whole day.
I, Willy Wonka, will conduct you around the factory myself, showing you everything there is to see.
Afterwards, when it is time to leave, you will be escorted home by a procession of large trucks, each one filled with all the chocolate you could ever eat.
And remember, one of you lucky 5 children will receive an extra prize beyond your wildest imagination. Now, here are your instructions.
On the 1st of February, you must come to the factory gates at 10 a.m. sharp. You're allowed to bring one member of your family to look after you. Till then, Willy Wonka. 1st of
The first day of February, cried Mrs. Bucket. But that's tomorrow. Today is the last day of January. I know it is. You are just in time. shouted Grandpa Joe. "There's not a moment to lose. You must start preparations at once. Wash your face, comb your hair, scrub your hands, brush your teeth, blow your nose, cut your nails, polish your shoes, iron your shirt, and for heaven's sake, get all that mud off your pants. You must get ready, my boy. You must get ready for the biggest day of your life." Now, students, Mrs. Bucket, that is mother of Charlie, remember that today is the last day of the February and he has to go tomorrow, yeah, next day only. Okay, now Grandpa Joe was very excited and he asked Charlie to check out his own personal grooming by washing his face and scrubbing his hands and all that. See, as you remember, they are very poor. They don't have many spare clothes. That is why he is saying that press your, iron your clothes also, and the pants should be clean. Okay, they are muddy and they should get it clean. All these things are the preparations for going to the factory.
That's tomorrow. Then there's not a moment to lose, Charlie. Wash your face, comb your hair, scrub your hands, brush your teeth, blow your nose. Get that mud off your pants. No.
"Now don't overexcite yourself, Grandpa," Mrs. Bucket said, "and don't fluster poor Charlie. We must all try to keep very calm. Now the first thing to decide is this: who is going to go with Charlie to the factory?" "I will," shouted Grandpa Joe, leaping out of the bed once again. "I will take him. I will look after him. You leave it to me." Mrs. Bucket smiled at the old man. Then she turned to her husband and said, "How about you, dear? Don't you think you ought to go?" Mr. Bucket said gently, "Mind you, I would love to go. It will be tremendously exciting. But on the other hand, I believe that the person who really deserves to go most of all is Grandpa Joe himself, provided, of course, that he feels well enough." Now, as Mr. Bucket, that is Grandpa Joe, was giving so many instructions to Charlie, Mrs. Bucket, that is the mother of Charlie, requested Grandpa Joe not to fluster Charlie and let us first decide who is going to accompany Charlie. Okay, one person has to go and they have to decide who wants to go. Grandpa Joe really wanted to go because worked with Mr. Wonka and he was always telling stories about the Wonka's factory to little Charlie, right? So he was very excited. But Mrs. Bucket asked the father of Charlie, Mr. Bucket, whether he wants to go or not. But Mr. Bucket said that yes, he wants to go, but the right person will be Grandpa Joe. If he's feeling well, then he should go. He took the call.
We must all try and keep very calm. First thing that we have to decide is this. Who is going with Charlie to the factory? I will. I'll take him. You leave it to me. How about you, dear? Do you think you want to go?
Well, Grandpa Joe seems to know more about it than we do. Provided, of course, he feels well enough.
"Yippee!" shouted Grandpa Joe, seizing Charlie by the hands and dancing from the room. "He certainly seemed well enough," Mrs. Bucket said laughingly. "Yes, perhaps Grandpa Joe should be the one to go with him. I certainly can't go myself and leave the other three old people all alone in bed for the whole day." Or at that point there came a loud knock on the front door. Mr. Bucket went to open it, and the next moment swarms of newspapermen and photographers were pouring into the house. They had tracked down the finder of the fifth golden ticket, and now they all wanted to get the full story for the front page of the morning papers. It must have been nearly midnight before Mr. Bucket was able to get rid of them so that Charlie could go to bed. Now, students, Grandpa Joe, who has not came out of the bed for last 20 years, was very excited. He was dancing around the room, and Mrs. Bucket also mm, said that she also believed that Grandpa Joe should go, because see, other grandparents were on in the bed only, and she has to take care of those grandparents. Okay, but at that time only the newspaper man, the reporters came, and they were asking the few questions from Charlie and his family. They have tracked down who has won the fifth ticket, and they wanted their interviews for the newspaper. Students, everyone was excited. Charlie was excited too, but he was thinking to take the money for his ticket which was offered in the store. But all the other grandparents loved him equally, and Grandpa told him to seize the chance and go and visit the factory. By the encouragement of all the grandparents and the blessings, he went at sharp 10 to visit the factory along with four other children who were selected for this visit. Charlie and his whole family was really excited by his chance to go. Now students, if you want to enjoy the movie, you can watch it. I hope you will enjoy this chapter.